and best of luck to both of you. You could applaud.
Before I start rambling about nuclear war, there are a couple thank yous a couple of people I'd like to thank. The first being the LD squad. Y'all, we grinded, now look where we are. I'd also like to thank my coaches, Jennifer and Sajidi, as well as the rest of the Carmel debate team. We were at like 6 members 2 years ago. Now we have 2 people on the final stage, and then the final person I'd like to thank is my dad. You know, judging almost every meeting last 2 years, it's been a blast, and thanks for letting me do debate. And final people I'd like to thank are the judges that gave me the wins today, because truly, without you, I would be. Are my judges ready? Alright. Time starts now. Because the possession of nuclear weapons ends up harming states that possess them, I affirm. I can provide definitions upon request, so let's just delve into the framework. My value for today's debate is justice, defined as giving each their due. As the resolution states, ought, and ought means moral obligation, we need a value that deals with moral righteousness to answer the question of the resolution, and only justice can do this. My value criterion for today's debate is just war theory. In order for an act to be just, it must be just during war. Conversely, if an act violates just war theory outside of war, it is clearly unjust. There are 2 prongs to just war theory, the first being discrimination. War must discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. Innocent non-military people should never be made a target of attack. And the second prong is legitimacy. The act of war must be done by a legitimate actor. Prefer my value criterion additionally for 2 reasons. The first being that states are uniquely bound by international law to follow certain rules. This is the only enforceable obligation of the state. The Geneva Convention, applicable to all states, is based on just war theory. And the second reason to prefer is that when a state meets just war theory, they reach all the so-called big values we care about in society in Lincoln Douglas debate. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy writes, societies that fail to meet just war theory lose out on justice and morality. When actors that choose to go to war do so justly, they gain legitimacy as independent actors. What this means is that in order to meet any sort of societal welfare, justice, morality, government legitimacy, or political legitimacy value, a state must follow just war theory first. Contention 1 is during peace. Nuclear weapons violate just war theory during times of peace. Subpoint A is testing. As the leaders of countries propose nuclear weapons in North Korea and the US, it spurs more testing. However, the common testing of nuclear weapons literally kills people. Romande at the University of Switzerland writes in 2017, nuclear weapons have been tested on more than 2,000 occasions. Roughly 2.4 million people will eventually die as a result of the atmospheric nuclear test conducted between 1945 and 2008. Subpoint B is legitimacy. Nuclear weapons hurt a state's legitimacy directly through a decrease in foreign policy soft power. When states gain access to nuclear weapons, their soft power goes down. Think the boy who cried wolf, except in this case, it's states threatening to use their nuclear weapons. At some point in time, the state is just entirely dismissed. The data backs this up as well. Later, Harvard found in 2019 that of 210 instances from 1948 to 2018 in which nations tried to coerce other countries, nuclear states achieved their ends 20.4% of the time, while non-nuclear states had a 32.1% success rate. Subpoint C is war. The mere suspicion of possession of nuclear weapons increases the probability that a nation ends up in violent conflict. The Nuclear Threat Initiative writes in 2017 that concern over Iraq reconstituting its weapons of mass destruction programs was a major justification for Operation Iraqi Freedom, the 2003 U.S.-led invasion and occupation of Iraq. In the 1999 part of the war between India and Pakistan was uniquely started because of the rapid-fire nuclear test meant to show escalating power. The countries literally went to war because the other nation had nuclear weapons. Now declassified CIA briefings found that Pakistan would have used their nuclear weapons if it weren't for U.S. intervention, negotiation, and the conflict. The empirics support this idea as well. Oxford weapons have an approximately 7 times greater probability, around 23.8%, of escalating into disputes in which neither party possesses nuclear arms, around 3.2%. Thus, the presence of nuclear weapons violates just war theory during times of peace. Contention 2 is with launch. Any launch of a nuclear weapon violates both prongs of just war theory. Nuclear bombs are uncontrollable, thus killing innocents, and any launch of one would automatically reduce a country's credibility in the international realm. Subpoint A is this calculation. There have been a few times in history where nuclear weapons were mere minutes away from being deployed. In 1995, the launch of an American scientific rocket led to the Russian nuclear arsenal being a mere 4 minutes away from being activated. Hawaii experienced this just 2 years ago with the false alarm in relation to a missile. There have been 32 accidents in relation to nuclear weapons. Simply put, accidents in this calculation are a real possibility. And as nuclear weapon systems become more advanced, controllers are called with mistakes and thus accidental launch. Culkin of the University of Missouri writes in 2015 that 92 officers at the Malmstrom Air Force Base were suspended in underground nuclear missile capsules for cheating on monthly proficiency tests. Human error would lead to the launch of weapons. We've seen this already. Subpoint B is a cyber attack. The risks of cyber attacks are high and increasing. Slow updates in technology mean that we're always behind. Friar Biggs of the Center of Public Integrity in 2018 found that military satellites and ground stations deployed to pass secure messages between the U.S. Army's portable radios and cellular networks around the globe in relation to nuclear weapons had more than 1,000 cyber vulnerabilities. A 2016 Pentagon testing report corroborated these results. Subpoint C, my final subpoint, is theft. Only governments have the capabilities to gather nuclear fissile material, but the material is susceptible to theft. Birch of Foreign Policy writes in 2012 that a total of about 84 pounds of weapons-usable material is suspected of having been diverted from Russia's nuclear centers. And Dr. Allison at Harvard found in 2010 that the stolen material would amount to 3 stolen nuclear bombs circulating on the black market today. Thus, I affirm, as the presence of nuclear weapons makes states A, less just, less legitimate, and ultimately just hurt the states themselves. Thank you, and I now stand ready for CS.
Alright, everybody ready? Okay. So first, I guess I have a basic clarification question. What was the time for your second contention?
Just War 3 is violated due to nuclear launch.
Okay. Has there ever actually been a miscalculation that's led to any tangible impacts, say like death or anything like that?
Absolutely, right? Like during the Hawaiian conflict, there was obviously multiple panics and heart attacks caused by the fear of nuclear weapons landing on Hawaii themselves.
Okay, but were nukes actually launched?
Just because nuclear weapons weren't actually launched doesn't mean that we are not edging dangerously close to potential extinction.
Okay, we're edging towards extinction because of the fact that nuclear war could happen?
Absolutely.
Okay. Moving on to your value doctrine tree, you talk about justice and the just war theory. But you say that the just war theory only applies during times of war, correct?
No, just war theory applies during all times. My argument is that when just war theory is violated during times of war, it would be just as bad, if not even more bad, for it to be violated during times of peace.
In the status quo, are there any wars happening?
Yeah, there are plenty of wars happening in the
Could you name a couple?
Yeah, so right now, the United States still hasn't pulled out of Afghanistan.
Okay. In those conflicts, are both states possessing nukes?
And I mean, it depends on the conflict. Afghanistan in itself, no.
Okay. Moving on to your first contention, you talk about how testing kills people. Is testing still actively happening?
Yeah, so as states update their nuclear arsenals, testing increases. The United States recently proposed updates to their arsenals. Since those updates are about to happen, testing will have to happen to corroborate the results of those updates.
Okay, do you have evidence telling us that we're definitely going to be testing nukes in the future, especially with the United States, which has already tested their nukes to the extent that we know that they work?
Well, first, North Korea in and of itself is already testing its nuclear weapons.
Okay, when did North Korea acquire nuclear weapons?
In 2006.
Right, so weren't they actually testing them just to see, like, hey, they work? I mean, the United States got nuclear weapons 70 years ago, so they've already had enough time to do that.
Yes, and the United States also proposed upgrades to our nuclear testing systems just last year.
So what type of testing is actually dangerous?
Just any testing that
Is
leaks
underground
radiation.
nuclear testing hurting people in any way?
Yes, underground nuclear testing also leaks radiation into the groundwater and soil,
How do you know that?
according to the WEF.
Okay, and do you know for a fact that there are deaths directly attributed to underground nuclear testing?
Again, my study refers to all nuclear testing. I'm not really sure what your point is.
legitimacy a little bit. So can you explain this subpoint B of your first contention?
Yeah, so when states have nuclear weapons, they end up using their soft power.
Okay. But don't they gain the power of, I have a nuclear weapon, don't mess with me, that type of thing?
Well, one would logically think that, but when we look at the actual empirics, they lose their ability to negotiate diplomatically with other nations and
Okay, can you give one example of what countries that's happened to?
Like a single example of what a state has done.
Because it loves soft power.
Yeah, so the United States used to be ranked number 1 on the soft power index back in the year 2000. Now we've fallen to number 4.
And that's because of nukes?
It's partially because of nukes.
Okay, thank you. Alright, so we'll be presented by constructive and then moving on to progressive comments. Everybody ready? If you want peace, prepare for war. This ancient Roman phrase is just as true today as it was when it first said. Nuclear arsenals allow countries to deter their enemies from attacking them and are therefore a powerful instrument for global peace. For this simple reason, I negate resolve states out to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. Before getting into the rest of my case, I'd just like to clarify one important definition, that is ought is used to indicate duty or prejudice, typically when criticizing someone's actions, specifically with relation to morality. It's a moral obligation. This leads me to my guide today, societal welfare. Societal welfare is the health, comfort, and happiness of a community of individuals. In the context of this resolution, the society I'm referring to is a state. Societal or state-based welfare is the most important value because it provides the stability for citizens within said state to pursue the goals and maintain their standards of living. My guide portraying how we go about promoting societal welfare is maximizing governmental protection. Governmental protection is simply the act of the government keeping its people safe. Many well-known philosophers such as Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau uphold this idea that a government's primary obligation, what it ought to do, is protect its people. Governmental protection allows citizens to go about life as usual without the fear of being harmed and thus promotes the ultimate value of societal welfare. Now that I've explained my value doctrine, let's move on to my first contention. Contention 1. Nuclear arsenals keep people safe. When both sides of the conflict have the ability to obliterate each other with a simple push of a button, leaders choose not to engage in conflict, and history backs this idea. As Professor Kenneth Waltz of Columbia University reminds us, nuclear weapons have not been used since World War II, and there's never been a war between two states that possess nuclear weapons. A real-world example that illustrates this perfectly is the conflict between India and Pakistan. As Jonathan Tuckman of Newsweek tells us in 2009, before acquiring nuclear arsenals, India and Pakistan fought in 3 incredibly bloody wars that resulted in between 1 and 3 million deaths. Since acquiring atomic weapons, India and Pakistan have not engaged in war, and the death toll between the two of the minor conflicts is less than 1,000. This example goes to show us that even if countries still engage in conflicts, these conflicts will never escalate to the scale of the wars that were waged before the creation of nuclear weapons, most notably the 2 world wars, which, remember, 110 million people died in. According to Max Roser from Oxford, the number of deaths in battle worldwide has declined 95% since the invention and spread of nuclear weapons. With nuclear arsenals, conflicts no longer escalate to the massive limit scale of a world war because countries fear the atomic repercussions that could follow. Less people are dying, this is clearly a good thing. And eliminating nukes would bring an end to the 75 years of deterrent-based peace that we've been enjoying. To maximize governmental protection and thus uphold societal welfare, we need to keep nuclear arsenals. This leads me to my second contention, which is that nuclear knowledge cannot be eliminated. Even if the 9 countries which currently possess functioning nuclear arsenals decided to eliminate their arsenals, the knowledge of how to create nukes and the resources that allow for the creation cannot be eliminated. Nations know that if they're the only one who has the power of a nuclear weapon, the rest of the world will have to acquiesce to their will. They'll have the ultimate coercive power. In the negative world, a world where multiple stable countries have nuclear weapons, countries can keep each other in line and prevent this frightening scenario. To conclude, I submit litigation because it is morally irresponsible for states to eliminate something that allows them to protect. This leads me to address my opponent's arguments. First, to address the value of justice. Justice and morality go hand in hand, so I'm basically going to address these two things in hand. So when we're talking about a moral obligation, which is what ought implies, it also implies that we need to act in just ways. So because of this, because nuclear deterrence allows nations to keep their people safe, this allows justice to be upheld. Additionally, we need to realize that this is also good after this attack. His value criteria just war theory really only applies during times of war. It's talking about a theory that relates to war itself. Additionally, so because of this, because it only applies in times of war, because it's talking about what should happen during war, it doesn't really uphold his value of justice. And simply justice is, again, better upheld in the affirmation because countries are protecting the people. His first contention talks about like times of peace or during peace, nuclear arsenals are still hurting people. His first point is that testing kills people. However, we need to realize is that dangerous testing is not happening anymore. He comes up here and claims that underground testing is very dangerous, but it simply is not. According to the U.S. Congress Office of Technology Assessment, testing nukes underground allows the radiation to be safely contained. The U.S. government is literally telling us that it's completely safe, and the last time that an above-ground nuclear test happened was 1992. These dangerous tests aren't happening anymore. We can't solve the deaths of the past, and there's not going to be deaths from testing in the future. Now moving on to his subpoint B, he talks about legitimacy, and he says like nukes get rid of soft power, basically. However, this cannot be directly attributed to nukes. When I bring this up in cross-examination, he doesn't really explain why the U.S. went down on that whatever sort of list he brought up, and we can't attribute it to nukes. In fact, nukes give countries the power to protect their people, which again is very, very important because that is their ultimate obligation. This allows them to be a more legitimate government because legitimate governments have to protect their people. That is their obligation. His subpoint C talks about war, and he brings up the India-Pakistan example. However, this conflict shows us exactly how escalation doesn't happen when we have nuclear arsenals. With India and Pakistan, they had 3 wars before getting nukes that led to the death of between 1 and 3 million people. Since getting nukes, there was less than 1,000 deaths in conflicts between the 2 states, which shows us that this example doesn't stand. He also talks about how there's a 7 times greater probability of escalation with nuclear countries. However, he doesn't read the key part of this card, which is a 7 times greater probability of nukes escalating short of war. War doesn't actually happen. There might be some escalation, but because war isn't happening, there aren't these deaths. We can literally look to the Cold War and see this. There were very few deaths during the Cold War, and that is because of nukes. Now to move on to his second contention, he talks about nuclear launching relates to his just war theory. I'm kind of going to attack this altogether, but basically it's all based on speculation. Miscalculation has never led to any sort of death or tangible real-world impact that we can point to as, hey, this is bad. Nuclear deterrence keeps people safe, so therefore we can't assume that this would happen. He talks about cyber attacks, but again, this has never led to any real impacts. And then he also talks about theft. However, we need to realize that as Tepperman of Newsweek tells us in 2009, quote, the U.S. government has made it very clear that it would regard any use of a nuclear weapon as an attack by the country that supplied it, any terrorist use. So let's say a terrorist takes it and they use it against someone, that would be whoever was partaking in that, they would get attacked. So this highly disincentivizes anyone from taking nukes because they would feel the repercussions of that. So for all of these reasons and the reasons I brought in my case, I urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Are the judges good?
Yeah.
Time starts now. So you specifically talk about the Indo-Pak War and how deterrence keeps us safe. How many deaths have actually been attributed to the Carmel War? I know it's greater than 1,000.
It is exactly 1,000 actually. And the reason why this matters, even though it's called the Carmel War, 1,000 deaths is significantly less than the 1 to 3 million that we were seeing before they got nukes.
Okay, and how many people died in proxy wars in relation to the Cold War?
I believe it's about 10.4 million people.
It's actually a lot more than that. It's around 25 million. Again, isn't that enough to prove that deterrence doesn't work?
No, because the proxy wars weren't being directly fought by nuclear states, so therefore it's no.
What do you mean? Both the United States and the Soviet Union were in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as Korea and Vietnam. What do you mean not being fought directly by nuclear states?
Okay, but if we look at the actual Cold War, the direct conflict between the United States and Russia, the reason why neither United States citizens or Russian citizens died, the reason why both governments were upholding their ultimate values to protect the people is because they had nuclear arsenals. Nukes allow them to protect the people.
Okay, I'm gonna move on there. Do you have a single study in case that shows that deterrence is true?
Not in case, but I can bring it up right now.
I don't see anyone right now. Then you move on, you discuss this death in war by 95%. Can this be isolated to nuclear arsenals, or is this a change in terms of like an increase in allies or an increase in medical technology due to war? Is this correlation or causation?
It's causation, and the reason why is because of the fear that nukes instill. The whole idea of nuclear deterrence is that nukes deter people because of the horrible impacts that a nuke can have, and because of this we've seen less death and conflict because of the lack of escalation.
Have more conflicts happened since World War II than before World War II?
No, because the amount of... No.
Actually, more conflicts have happened since World War II. So again, I'm not really seeing where you're going here. On your contention too, you talk about this idea that the knowledge can't be eliminated. Specifically, which knowledge is that?
Literally how to build nukes.
Right, and you need enriched uranium to build nukes.
Correct.
How much is this enrichment required?
I think it's roughly like 80 to 90%. I don't know.
It's 90%. And how long does it take to build a centrifuge that ends up enriching a nuclear weapon to 90%?
Well, what you need to realize, and we can look to Iran to understand this, is that countries can have centrifuges which are basically almost there, and it wouldn't take them long, maybe 6 months, which is the case for Iran, to make those nuclear centrifuges to the point where they can have nukes.
Yeah, so Iran has had centrifuges for the last 15 years. Do you know what enrichment percent they're at right now?
I think it's 20.
It's at, 20% for 15 years.
Yes.
How do you expect any country that took 15 years to get to 20% jump to 90%?
The reason why it's like that is because of the nuclear, is because of the Iran deal that we had. They were told not to continue enriching uranium. They very well could have done it.
We have a lot to cover in this speech, but order is going to be pretty simple. First, I'm going to start on the affirmative side of your flow, and then I'm just going to move straight to the negative while making a few clarifications. Are all my judges ready? Great. Time starts now. So first on my value of justice, my opponent's only response was that justice is upheld, but we have to realize that the lens we're looking at justice through this round is just war theory, and my casing clearly tells you how just war theory is violated. On just war theory, her only response was that it only considers times of war. So I make a pretty simple argument. Most acts that are not considered just during times of war are, or flip that, most acts that are considered just during times of war are considered just during times of peace as well. The mere baseline for justice is during times of war. Again, just war theory, while technically a theory about war, applies everywhere. And the facts that we shouldn't kill innocents and that we shouldn't, and our government should be legitimate, remain upheld. On my contention, one of peace on testing, her only response was that testing isn't happening anymore. But we have to realize that first, North Korea's testing underground has leaked radiation, very dangerous radiation. So this response is essentially not upheld. But second, and more importantly, as we update our nuclear arsenals to include more recent technology, we're going to have to end up testing them again, which ends up killing more people. On legitimacy, her only response was that it's kind of not related, but we have to realize that if we actually look at the empirics, if we look at the studies, government legitimacy is just clearly harmed if we have nuclear weapons. Our soft power decreases, so we're going to extend that late 19 study from Harvard that tells you that states with nukes have a 12% less chance of soft power coercion than states without nukes. On war, she had a couple of key responses. The first being that the Carmel War was less violent than other wars, but we have to realize that the Carmel War was not the only example I brought up. Again, it's correlation, not causation, and if you look at the war in Iraq, around 2 million people have ended up dying. We have to realize that, again, that nuclear weapons increase the probability of war. Specifically on Jello 2010, she said short of war, but we have to realize that it also considers violent conflicts. It's just merely a definitional debate in which war never actually happened, but a whole bunch of violent conflict did. But we care about violent conflict because people end up dying. So Jello 2010 still clearly applies. On contention to a launch, her only responses were that this is speculation. First, while I agree with speculation, it doesn't matter because the risk is nuclear war. The risk outweighs all possibility. But more importantly, it's not just speculation. Look to the example of the German Patriot missile that ended up being hacked and used against its own country. Cyber attacks are coming, and they're coming quickly. On theft, her only response was that the U.S. will hold other countries responsible. We have to realize that terrorists are martyrs. They don't really care about the U.S. holding them responsible. On to my opponent's side of the case. First, on the value debate, Justice is a prerequisite to societal welfare, and in order for a society to be well off, it must meet aspects of justice. That's the reason why I prefer justice in today's debate. And on the value criterion of maximizing governmental protection, we have to realize that this is not an enforceable obligation of the state. The only enforceable obligation of the state talked about in today's debate is going to be just war theory, because states are actually bound by international law to do this. And second, government protection isn't always good. The government has screwed up while protecting its people plenty of times. On our contention, one of the deterrents, first, cross-apply the fact that deterrence simply hasn't worked, but second, and more probability, deterrence doesn't work with nukes in the conventional war. We've lost in the Cuban, Iranian, and Nicaraguan revolution despite possessing nukes. On our second contention, a couple key responses. First, we've eliminated biological weapons and chemical weapons with no repercussions. And second, and more importantly, this is not what we're debating about. It's whether states should eliminate their nuclear weapons, not whether we can or whether it's strategically viable to do so. And for all these reasons, I urge a strong affirmative ballot.
Alright, so I realized it's about to say thank yous before this, so I'm just going to do that real quick, if you guys don't mind, and then I'll move into my, is that okay for everyone? Cool, okay. So first, I'd just like to thank my parents and my sister. They're like my foundation, my family, and I love them so much. Also, I want to thank my coaches. Shout out to Daniel, Priya, see you out there, Mr. Smith. You guys taught me everything I know about debate, everything I know about LD. I thought you guys were going to be up here. And finally, thank you to my teammates. Westside, you're really the ones who make debate fun, from like our karaoke, bus rides, and everything. Like, it's just a good time. Thank you guys. So yeah, now I'm going to move into my rebuttal. So first, I'd just like to say that the risk of nuclear war is not outweighed because of the fact that deterrence exists. There's not going to be a risk of nuclear war because countries are so scared of the consequences of nuclear war that it simply won't happen. I just want to get that clarification. So now I'm going to move into his attacks on my case. He says that my value societal welfare needs just war theory to exist, or he says that like justice is a prerequisite for societal welfare. However, if it's a prerequisite, societal welfare is still the end goal. Justice is just a subset of the end goal, which at the end of the day, societal welfare allows all of us to live our lives. If we don't have a well society, if we don't have a stable society, we cannot go about our daily lives. He attacks my value criterion, which is maximizing governmental protection, by saying that governments have like messed up a lot in the past, but in the ideal world, what ought to happen, governments wouldn't be messing up. And legitimate governments don't mess up, which that's part of his own case. He brings up governmental legitimacy. So we need to assume that governments aren't going to be messing up in the future, and governments that are legitimate typically act in the best interest of their people. The best interest of the people is to protect them, and nukes allow them to do this. Additionally, he's attacking my first contention. I say that nuclear arsenals keep people safe, and he says that basically deterrence doesn't really work. However, we need to understand that empirical evidence and historical evidence backs this. First, let's look at the Cold War. The reason why there was no actual conflict in the Cold War, it wasn't a hot war, was because of the fact that both countries, Russia and the US, were scared to attack each other. Nuclear deterrence was actively keeping people safe. Same thing is true for India and Pakistan. The reason why there have been significantly less deaths in war is because nukes are causing these conflicts not to escalate to the grand scale of 1 to 3 million deaths. Additionally, if you go into this empirical evidence, according to a meta-analysis published by the Oxford Research Encyclopedia in 2017 that analyzed over 50 studies, nuclear weapons generally work in deterring warfare guidance. Eric Wiebe of the University of Bonn in Germany conducted 2 studies which examined 299 conflicts for evidence related to the patterns of deterrence, success, and failure. And these studies concluded that generally, quote, nuclear weapons assist in producing successful deterrence outcomes. So what this goes to show us is that nuclear weapons are allowing governments to deter violence. They're allowing governments to keep their people safe, which again is their ultimate obligation. This is a really big part of today's round because we're talking about states. States are the actors. States are the ones who are, we're talking about what they ought to do. And at the end of the day, their moral obligation, what they ought to do is protect the people who allow for this. He attacks my second contention, which is that nuclear knowledge cannot be eliminated, by saying that they still should be eliminated. But the reason why they should, and the reason why you really need to flow this contention to the ground, is because if we got rid of nuclear arsenals, if we affirm, and then one irrational actor, like say Kim Jong-un in North Korea, decided to up and get nuclear arsenals again, act on his nuclear knowledge, and actually make nukes again, then the world would be in trouble. Because irrational actors, if there's no rational actors to balance them out, if the United States, Russia, China, like stable countries, don't have nukes to deter irrational actors from having nukes, we could see a lot of horrible impacts. Some of the impacts he brings up in his own case, potentially a nuclear war where North Korea is the only one who has nukes, that would be a huge problem. So now moving on to address some of the other things that we brought up. He talks about radiation, we talk about nuclear testing and the harms of this. However, we need to realize that he doesn't actually prove that underground testing is bad. He doesn't bring up any evidence, whereas I literally said the US government tells us that nuclear testing is not harmful. Additionally, he says that he brings up Iraq and how 2 million people died in Iraq, and this was in response to his, he was talking about how basically like, I brought up India and Pakistan, and he said that people are still dying in Iraq. Maybe if Iraq had nukes, then we wouldn't be in their business, we wouldn't be attacking them, because nuclear deterrence might be working for them too. The fact of the matter is that countries that have nukes are safer. Countries that have nukes deter conflicts from happening within them, to them, around them. That's what deterrence does. So now to move into some voting issues. My first is on framework. At the end of the day, the one thing that we're talking about today is what states ought to do. So of course we have to maximize governmental protection because governmental protection is what states ought to do. That's why my ballot flows through. Why it allows for societal welfare is because if we don't have safe spaces, we don't have our governments protecting us, we cannot have a well society. A world without nukes is a world without governmental protection, or a world without nukes is one in which countries which have nukes are giving up that ability to protect. If the US up and got rid of their nukes, they would get rid of their nuclear deterrence safety net, which is keeping all of us safe literally right now. My second voting issue is simply that deterrence empirically and historically works. My opponent has not come up here and said anything against deterrence empirically or historically, and therefore it has to fall through again. This Oxford meta-analysis looked at over 50 studies tells us that it generally works, and looked at the Cold War, looked at the India-Pakistan conflict. Deterrence is keeping these countries from going to war. There's 95% less death when we have nuclear arsenals, and for these reasons I urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Alright, so first I'm going to be making a couple key extensions on the conceded arguments, then I'm going to make a few clarifications in today's round, and finally I'm going to jump straight into voters. Are all my judges ready? Great. Time starts now. So first on the conceded arguments, on my opponent's value criterion debate of maximizing governmental protection, she does not address the fact that this is a non-enforceable obligation of the state. We're going to extend that through today's round. We have to have an enforceable obligation of the state, otherwise they simply won't follow it. Just war theory is enforceable, thus it should be our value criterion in today's round. Another key extension that I would make in today's round is this idea that elimination is feasible. Look to the Biochemical Weapons Convention or the Chemical Weapons Convention, in which we managed to eliminate those weapons with no drawbacks. Elimination, while my opponent claims isn't possible, has already happened in classes of other weapons, so this argument clearly falls. And then the final quick extension I want to make in today's round is on this issue of deterrence, specifically regarding nuclear war. My opponent brings up this idea that nuclear war is a deterrent, but we have to realize that for the three examples I bring up, miscalculation, cyber attack, and theft, the government doesn't control what happens in regards to those. The people who do control those are people that simply can't be deterred, i.e. cyber hackers or terrorists. Deterrence simply falls here, leading to a high probability of nuclear war. The final clarification I want to make in today's round is on this issue of testing. My opponent says I don't bring up an example of which underground testing hasn't worked, but there are a couple key responses. The first being that 2.4 million number, which I wish would be touched more in today's round, did consider this underground testing, but more importantly, North Korea's underground test site recently collapsed and reached radiation just last year. That's an attack that was left conceded. So this brings me to my voters in today's round, the first being, if you do give my opponent a framework, if you do value societal welfare and maximizing governmental protection, realize that you're still going to vote affirmative. Why? Because nuclear weapons take away from a state's legitimacy through soft power, hurting their foreign policy interests, and thus minimizing governmental protection. Obviously, testing ends up killing massive amounts of citizens of those very same states. And finally, and most importantly, we've clashed over this idea of deterrence in today's round, but realize that the empirical examples that I provide, in which we thought Iraq had nuclear weapons, we ended up going to war anyways. That means that we simply don't consider nuclear weapons to be some sort of deterrent. Deterrence doesn't work, and in turn, actually escalates violent conflict. So that's going to be my first voter issue in today's round. Nuclear weapons mitigate government protection, not maximize them. My second voter issue in today's round is under my own framework. If you give me my framework, you're going to vote affirmative because only the affirmative has met this burden. And the third and final voter issue in today's round is going to be on this idea of nuclear war. It outweighs all other impacts, and it was essentially left unaddressed in today's round because my opponent doesn't consider these circumstances. For all these reasons, I urge a strong affirmative ballot and hope you